Morning,
Hey,
gents.
Good
morning,
morning,
sir.
Ian.
How are you guys?
Never better.
All
I'm,
good. Yeah.
I have a little cold, but I think I'm producing sufficiently for the recording.
Sufficiently to be on your firstly participating in a Generation on the Rise podcast.
Yeah, this
This
We're
is
gonna
cold is
high pressure situation.
very
we
high
have,
pressure. Yeah.
we
And
have
you want your
to.
voice to be coming across well.
I understand,
yeah.
but I think Generation on the Rise is appropriate for the both of you, but maybe not so much for me.
Not so much you. We'll get to introductions here in a second, but
Yeah.
as always, Dave especially. Anything crazy this week? Any major updates?
Oh
No?
no, it
No?
was all
All's
pretty
good on your
mellow.
end?
Yeah,
Yeah.
something's. I mean, something's going through the office.
Oh
So
geez.
and
And you've got it.
small. No, I'm good. But everybody else seems to have come down with it. So
Oh
this
no.
morning it was kind of those small administrative offices. You kind of like beg, borrowing, and stealing for
Yeah.
administrative support. Like, okay, who's going to cover the front? And you get it from this time. So I've got it all set up. I think
All right, good. Good.
we're in good
Yep.
shape.
Yep.
Yeah.
You'll appreciate we taught the newly elected municipal officials class for the Pennsylvania State Association of Boroughs in Berks County, Pennsylvania last weekend. We had about
Exciting.
25 excellent participants, and I've heard from many of them in the last week. The questions, how do you do this? How do you do that? Everything from like, I have questions I want to hold at town halls, who hosts your website, to
Yeah.
specific Parks and Rec question. It's been really fun. Brandon said in a previous episode, there's nothing like that new elected official and that new elected official smell. He said, I remember the direct quote, and how excited they are. So it was super fun to train them. And this weekend is the largest of the Boroughs Association's NEMO classes. We're going to have, I think, 62
Yeah,
participants or something like
65,
that.
something. It's a huge
Yeah,
class.
and that'll be in Delaware County, beautiful Swarthmore Borough, a member of PSAB.
Yeah.
I don't know if they're listeners to the Generation on the Rise podcast, but it'll be a good time.
Former home of was it Bill?
Bill Webb.
Bill
Yes, I think he's a listener. Hello, Bill.
Hello, Bill.
Yeah, he was the manager of Swarthmore Borough, and then he went down to, oh man, what's the name of that county in Virginia? Isle of
Virginia.
something. Oh man,
Yeah.
I'll pull up LinkedIn while we're on here and figure
Well,
it
look,
out.
I mean, I should say, since you guys are both here, I've heard nothing but good feedback about the Nemo training you guys do. You're doing the good work for Pennsylvania State Association of Boroughs. Jeffrey, I was in your managing the borough
Yeah.
manager and the borough they manage or whatever it was. I thought, the title could use a little work, but the content was fantastic. I was like, I was in the background like, yeah, man, I'm glad he said that. Oh yeah, all right. So you have at least one fan.
Good.
I will
Thanks,
say
man.
there are a handful of instructors for the NEMO classes for the Borough Association around the state, and they're all phenomenal. We appreciate all of them. So the feedback that you're getting and hearing about it goes out to all those instructors.
Everybody. Yeah,
Yes,
and big
congratulations to them.
shout out to Wendy Nickerson over there at PSAB.
Wendy's great. Yeah.
She's a rock star.
Yeah,
I've
she's
really
terrific. Really like Wendy. Yeah, absolutely. Circling back, William Webb on LinkedIn. He'd probably like for you to follow him. He's an avid poster. He's the assistant county administrator of Isle of Wight County. I knew it was Isle something. Isle of Wight County, that's just outside of Hampton, Virginia. It's considered to be in Tidewater, Virginia. So
That's a nice part of the
south.
state. I like it
And
down
it
there.
really is really nice. Yeah. And I know he's really enjoying it. He'll be coming up for the Local Government Reimagined Conference for ICMA in Philadelphia in May. So we look forward to that reunion.
That's right.
Sure.
All right, ready to get started?
Yeah, let's do it.
Sure.
Okay, welcome back. This is another week of your favorite podcast, Generation on the Rise, where we go there. You sort of know the drill. We sort of kick a topic around each week. We talk about it. We, sort of figure out what our thoughts are about it, share some stories, tell old ones and new, try to reduce the repeats, but they happen as well. Joined here by my co-host, Dave Provoco. We are without Brandon Ford this week. So, Dave, you and I are going to have to hold down the fort, which I think we can totally do. In addition, for first time ever on Generation on the Rise, we have a guest. We are joined here by Jeffrey Stonehill, who is the borough manager of the borough of Chambersburg. Jeffrey has many distinct accomplishments that he's going to go over, including a long local government career, both here and in Pennsylvania, as well as a stint in New York, which I'm sure he'll talk about, as well as various advisory capacities, including to our capital of Pennsylvania, the city of Harrisburg. One of the distinctions that Jeffrey does not carry is being a generation on the rise generation. So we're super looking forward to a different generational perspective. Not that we're calling you old, Jeffrey. We're just saying you're not
No, it's
young.
fine. Seasoned.
Seasoned. There you go. I like that. I like that. Marinated, perhaps. So we appreciate having you here, Jeffrey. You're our first official guest on the Generation on the Rise podcast. And for our listeners, just so you know, this is going to be our new thing. We're going to be rotating guests in and out of this podcast, talking about different topics, hearing about others' areas of expertise, their perspectives, and sort of kicking things around, bringing a new element, a new flavor to this podcast. So we're looking forward to it. So Jeffrey, we didn't intend for you to be number one. It just sort of worked out that way as we were sort of scheduling out our episodes, which we do. But we're super happy to have you. So Jeff, why don't you give yourself an introduction? We'd love to know a little bit about you,
Uh,
and then we'll
First
talk
of
about the
all,
topic of the day and get into it.
yeah. Well, thanks guys for inviting me to come. I really am honored. I'm a big fan of the podcast. I've been listening since its inception, and I think you guys are doing terrific work. I really love the topics that you're covering, and I am honored to have been invited to be a guest on the show. And hopefully, I can add some good information to the discourse on today's subject. Just a real quick, I don't think everybody's really excited to hear my full resume, but you are
They're
correct.
not, but give us an overview. Yeah.
I did start in New York State as an assistant manager. I went to undergraduate to New York University, and my graduate degree is from Pace University, both two New York area colleges. And I worked as an assistant manager in 3 communities north of New York City in Westchester County before transitioning to the beautiful state of Pennsylvania some 25 years ago. So I've been in Pennsylvania now for a long time and have worked in a couple of communities here in Pennsylvania, including Middletown Borough in Dauphin County, where I was for 9 years, and now Chambersburg in Franklin County, where I've been for 16 years. And amongst many other things that I have done in my career, I've also become a bit of an expert on municipal utilities, which I have managed in almost all of my stays, and the unique challenges of managing municipal utilities, as well as you've mentioned, helping other communities with financial resources and crisis management.
Including, I think, electrical utility, right? I mean, that's kind of a rare
That's right. You have a large electric
municipal
utility.
Yeah,
responsibility in Pennsylvania anyway.
yeah, Dave. So there are 35 boroughs, all boroughs in Pennsylvania that own and operate their own electric utilities. There's about 1,000 in the United States. And Chambersburg, where I'm the borough manager, is the largest of the 35. And we're the only one that has multiple electric generation stations as well. So we really are a full utility company, and all of those employees and resources and challenges are part of the day-to-day operations here in Chambersburg.
We're all looking forward to that Chambersburg nuclear plant coming online in a couple of years.
Very unlikely. Although I did work in Middletown Borough, which also has an electric utility, and that's right around the corner from 3 Mile
From
Island. So
TMI, yeah.
TMI. So
Oh
I
yeah.
am familiar with. I actually toured TMI, and I was able to go into the famous control room,
Oh,
which looks
wow.
just like the movies.
That's why you have that. That's why you have that nice glow about you all the time.
Yeah, there we go. There we go. Okay, so the topic today, Jeffrey, that we're really interested to get your perspective on is what we call management under pressure. And we're going to throw in there crisis as the new normal, which is a question we have. So you as an avid listener to Generation on the Rise, something that Dave and I especially, but Brandon too, that we get into is we talk about, the pressure cooker that is this environment. We've talked about it in a number of different ways. On my drive in this morning, I was actually listening to last week's episode of Generation on the Rise, where Dave, you and I are having an intense, I don't know if you've listened to the episode, Dave. We're having an intense back and forth about like managers being represented and how do we advocate for ourselves and how do we sort of navigate maybe tricky waters when we have a difficult board. We've talked about living in our communities. We've sort of grazed the topic of residency requirements in previous organizations, previous episodes. We've talked about residency requirements. We talked about the benefits and disadvantages to living within our communities. We sort of talked about how, Dave, your phrase, right? Heavy lies the crown, right? The wind blows harder at the top. We've sort of talked about all of these things, and it really goes to management under pressure, right? We're in a pressure-driven environment, and I think the Generation on the Rise generation feels that from multiple different angles. So my question to you, just to get us started here, is: are we feeling daily pressure? Is it real pressure, or is this perceived pressure? And then Jeffrey, as maybe the more seasoned manager here, has it always been this way? Like, is this new? Dave, I'm going to kick it to you first. That pressure that we're feeling, is it manufactured? Is it real? Is it perceived? Like, give us an intro with that, and then Jeffrey, will kick it over to you, and we certainly want to hear your generational perspective.
Yeah, that's a great start. I think maybe a little bit of both, maybe real and manufactured. There are crises that we all, I think, would acknowledge are real. You know, water main leaks and major utility issues, emergencies, crime.
Disasters. Yeah.
These are things that I think everybody would agree are not manufactured. They're there. But then there are others that are maybe more top down or even bottom up if they come from our leadership or whatever, that maybe they perceive as crises in the big picture. That when you triage them, there might be three or four things ahead of them in line, and so it's kind of incumbent on us to filter those out and be able to give them the proper airtime when they need, but acknowledge that sometimes they're not quite as pressing or urgent as they appear to be.
Dave, in that situation, do you ever feel like you are feeling pressure about something and you some sort of learn that your governing body is maybe not feeling that pressure? That maybe you sort of creating that pressure environment on yourself?
I mean, sometimes I've tried. I think I've gotten better over the years at being able to take a step back and to use the Sonny Corleone, Tom Higgins or interaction. It's not personal. He's taking it very, very personal,
Exactly.
but it's something that you just get better at with time. You can acknowledge that not everything is a house on fire kind of situation, and it helps to really smooth things out. And I think when your leadership team and your staff see that you're not operating in crisis mode, it has echoes throughout the organization, and it just makes everything run a little bit more smoothly.
Jeffrey, thoughts?
Yeah, so I'd like to give the historic perspective on this. I will say that as I was a young manager coming up in the profession, I was taught by the seasoned managers who were around at that time that this kind of pressure, this intense, constant need to put out fires and address situations is not a new thing. And that helps put it in perspective. This is not, in that way, municipal management has always been a high pressure, intense occupation going back generations. And I think if you were to look back in even in your minutes, which are obviously very sanitized, you will find that in your municipalities, a lot of these real push button, third rail issues that you're dealing with today have been dealt with exactly the same way in the past. And that's a remarkable perspective that you can gain, which is that 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 30 years ago, in your community, many of these same issues were being debated and discussed and fought over. And so that's not new. And we lose that perspective as municipal managers where we think, that everything's coming at us like out of a fire hose. And sometimes we think this is the first time it's ever happened. And the answer is it probably isn't. It's specifically, that street or that parking issue or that park issue really may have been discussed several times in the past. So
Huh.
that's number one. And it may help you adjust your attitude to the intensity of the pressure if you realize it's really just a continuum. The day after you retire, the town will still be discussing those issues that you're discussing today. It does not stop ever. What has changed slightly is not the intensity, but it has been the expectation of the public for instantaneous response. That did not exist until very recently. I remember my senior thesis when I was in grad school was on the introduction of email to municipal government.
Oh my God.
I know, and it's my generation. So we didn't have. How did people contact local government? Well, we didn't even have, certainly no social media, but we didn't even have email. We had people would write us letters complaining about things, or they would call. Obviously, we've had telephones now for 100 years, but the speed at which government had to react to the crises has changed tremendously in a very short period of time. People really do expect in our society everything to be instantaneous. And so that expectation has added pressure to what is the usual continuum of intensity that is our profession.
So, Dave, in previous episodes, we've talked about the role of social media in local government and
Oh, yeah.
how that creates pressure on us about how these community Facebook pages can really drive conversation, can drive public participation in the democratic process. We talked about how our own social media can sort of play into that. I think I famously remarked that I don't really have social media. I'm not really engaged. My PIO has to show me screenshots of things that are happening. I can't just go and see the comment section on the Middletown Facebook page or anything like that. Do we think that the advent of social media has created more pressure on managers? Jeffrey, did you see that change over time? I mean, how does this, you know, What are your guys' thoughts on that?
I am very active in social media, especially for somebody of my generation, and I do think the expectation of a response and action has changed in a very recent times. I don't think that existed more than a few years ago. If you look back, when was Instagram founded? When was Facebook founded? We're really talking about in the not too distant past. These things didn't even exist. It's not to mention all the interaction of new apps and apps built specifically for municipal government. So, I mean, this
Right.
is all very relative new inventions, and I do think it adds additional pressure. I think from what I hear from other managers of every generation, that this constant 24-hour a day communication cycle that exists because of social media has really changed our ability to be thoughtful and address crises and challenges in a slow and methodical way, which is the way government is supposed to act. It's not supposed to be knee jerk, quick reaction. That's how mistakes are made. Yet we're being pushed into that because of the social media and the electronic communication environment that we now function in.
Dave,
Right.
this
There's can I respond
Please.
to that? I mean,
yeah,
I
please do,
think
please.
just to build on that, I mean, and social media is really a almost a continuum of different platforms now where I think many of us are very comfortable in the early generations of social media, the Facebooks, the X's, formerly known as Twitters. But how many of us are in TikTok, and even Instagram is kind of going to depend a little bit on where you're at and how invested you are, and how much resources you have to allocate to your social media presence. A web page, as Jeffrey mentioned, the kind of this blossoming of specific municipal apps. There's some that are out there that will allow residents to drive around and almost at the touch of a button can report a pothole or a streetlight outage or any issue that they come across. And as Jeffrey said, there's an expectation that there's an immediate reaction to that, that if you don't get to it quickly enough, the assumption is that they're being ignored. I mean, not all around, that's a general statement, but some of them, those keyboard warriors out there, now are empowered to amplify that grievance that they have using their own social media presences. I mean, how many of us, and I think there's a lot of value in this, but how many of us have, residents who have their own pages on Facebook or presences on social media that are almost exclusively established to attack or be critical of local government and board members, and that has emerged on specific issues. It's emerged in municipalities as a whole, and it's made for that crisis mode for managers just all that more difficult to take a step back from and to kind of usher it through the process, because that hasn't changed. It's still a deliberate, lengthy, resource intensive kind of industry that we operate in, and we just can't drop everything that we're doing to go address the keyboard warrior of the day.
So we engage on social media. In my community, we respond to Facebook comments when people direct message us on Facebook, which I understand to be not a lot of people, but it does happen, especially during like winter weather events and such. We respond actively at night on the weekends. I actually question whether or not we should. That's an engagement tool that I've sort of inherited and not addressed, but
Yeah,
Well, and
you
Eden,
can easily get in touch with us.
Eden, you have an auto response, or like almost, I don't even know how to describe this, but like if I think I was on your Facebook page for Middletown, and there was like a chat bot that said, is there something we could do to help you? So
Yeah. Yep, that's there. But if you
I,
direct message the Facebook admin, like, of our page, like, it's the PIO. She'll respond to you. Like, if
I
you have
think it's
questions about things.
I think it's a great tool. I don't want to sound like I'm being critical of it. I think if used
No.
correctly, it's wonderful, and certainly for getting information out and even for dialogue. I think the problem is that it's a slippery slope between dialogue and just allowing people to throw things at you, which cannot be addressed in a quick and easy manner.
So one of the things that we do is that if there is enough noise, hate to call it that, but if there's enough noise on social media about a certain topic, or if there's a sort of a larger topic that the board of supervisors is discussing over the course of multiple meetings that's creating a lot of noise and conversation in the community, if we see that, our PIO will dial into that. She's very good. And then all of a sudden we start creating content to it. Like, we're responsive.
Do you attempt to correct misinformation? Because
It
that's a
depends how bad
very
it
difficult.
is.
thing.
It
To,
really it depends how bad it is. We're not responding to every comment. I will admit sometimes, like, I see comments, I'm like, "Alright, I have to," and I get in there and we post. I don't do it personally. I know some managers get out there and correct misinformation personally. I don't have a Facebook, so I can't do that. But it does depend. It Misinformation irks me. I think it depends on if it's taking a life of its own.
I will say that we are blessed here in Chambersburg to have a 24-hour a day, 7-day a week live customer service center, and we have to have that because of the utilities that we
Sure.
operate.
Right, right.
So
Yeah, it
you
must
can
be nice.
call up.
Yeah.
It's very nice that the benefit of that is you can tell somebody on Facebook or on Instagram or anywhere, just call the 24-hour customer service center and they will explain to you the circumstance. You don't have to get into a dialogue on social media.
So I would say that most municipalities in Pennsylvania cannot relate to what you just said, Jeffrey. So Dave, everything the government is here and now. They want us to move quickly. How do we respond? How does that make you feel? And is that something that you sort of like understood as you came into this profession?
Well, I think I developed an understanding early on in the career because you learn these things quickly. You learn the expectations of the communities that you're a part of. You learn where the centers are of attention, whether it's just an individual or a group of individuals. Many of us have civic centers in our municipalities that are kind of become the host of a lot of these conversations very often in a very productive way. And of course, I assume both of you have as well over your careers established a proactive approach to community engagement, because
Mhm.
I think that the more out in front you can be for your elected officials, for your senior staff, for yourself, with with your community, it does pay dividends. It may be hard to realize in the moment because whatever issue you're out trying to get in front of, it might be very polarizing and there might be very strong opinions about it, and you've got to kind of take it in the chin a little bit and just kind of absorb the impact. And as you said, correct misinformation where it's appropriate. Sometimes sometimes it can make it worse. I think that was well put. So it's way more art than science. I think I did have a pretty good handle on it in most of the places that I've been, because I've been fortunate to have communities that have not really been as committed to fanning the flame as what I read about and what I think some of the other ones have been. So maybe I'm just
Really?
blessed. Yeah, I think
You've been in
I've
some really intense communities.
sure.
I'm surprised to hear that.
Well, I'll tell you, there doesn't seem to be, and maybe you disagree with this, but for me anyway, there hasn't been a correlation between the size of the community and the volatility, I guess, of community engagement. I mean, when I was in Susquehanna Township, Dauphin County, Harrisburg area, it was very difficult to get feedback on issues. To
Really?
the degree that we were, oh yeah, to the degree that we were trying new things as quickly as ideas came to us to try to solicit public input. We were leveraging some of the platforms that are out there specifically targeted to local government, and it was still almost crickets. We just and this was a community that, I mean, had so much good things going for it, but also had aging infrastructure, had a lot of crime, had a lot of true crises, I think, that we were trying to address. And it would have been very helpful to have a more engaged citizenry. But sometimes you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink it. And by contrast, some of the other places that I had that I think that I've been a part of that were comparatively not as in crisis had almost regular disruptions and those kind of issues that were manufactured, as you said earlier, would spring up overnight, almost unprovoked.
I think that's an interesting point, Dave, that you make, because sometimes, crisis is in the eye of the beholder. And I
I
think
was
we've
just gonna
all
say that.
experienced, we have a perspective as the municipal manager of all the goings on in the municipality, in the different neighborhoods, in the different projects. Whereas for somebody who's a citizen or a business, what happens on their front door, in the street in front of their house or in front of their business, is a crisis. It
It's
does
true.
affect their quality of life. It does affect their ability to be happy. And so we sometimes have to be understanding of the fact that their perspective, this thing that we don't think is that a larger crisis, could be perceived by them to be a very significant crisis. because it affects them and it affects them directly.
What do you think
So I
about
wanted
that, Ian?
to, yeah, I was going to dive right into that. Dave, earlier, sort of in your opening statement, we were talking about pressure, we were talking about crisis, and you were listing certain things as crises. And one of the things you said was a water main break. And I think that's a perfect example. I, as the manager, having managed utilities, most water main breaks I do not consider to be a crisis. You isolate the
True.
break, crews go out there, they isolate it, they fix it, they repair. We get back online the same day. Certainly, if the main drain is breaking and the repair is going to be much more complicated or longer than that, maybe that's a different calculation. But I, as a manager, am not usually identifying that as a crisis. However, if you're the home without water, if it's going to be for a long time, if it's creating significant service interruptions, that can be perceived as a crisis by that homeowner or that block of homes, so on and so forth. So my question is, and a topic that I'll just throw out there is crisis the new normal? Right. I have a member in our community who is very upset about piles of snow between the sidewalk and the curb, which is only like 18 inches, maybe 24 inches, but it's a large pile, right? Because PennDOT is pushing snow to the side of the road and the sidewalks are also getting cleared. This gentleman walks down that sidewalk. He's like, I can't even see, the cars. I want you to come and move the snow. We're not going to come. Like, that's not happening. Like, we're not going to move the mounds of snow
Absolutely.
between the sidewalk and the curb, but it's their crisis. And I have a lot of emails about it. It's a thing. So I
The
guess my question is from the municipal manager perspective is crisis the new normal? And does that change by community? Has that changed over time?
Mm,
What's
so my
happening there?
answer to that is no, it has not. Those kind of crises, yeah, that's today's crisis. And by the way, we have the exact same crisis because we just had a large snowstorm and a
Yep.
lot of cold weather, and none of it melted. And it hasn't happened a lot in our part of the country. So people are like, this is a crisis. This is this is
This
an
is terrible. You're
unbelievable thing.
ruining the community. We will never recover from this.
But the answer to your question is crisis. Is this something new? I'm just giving you my perspective that it is not something new. Just doesn't have, there's always something. That is a crisis today. That will be resolved shortly by the weather.
Do you think
But it's
though?
perceived as a crisis.
Do you think? And I mean, you have a longer career than either of us behind you, but and many many more years to go, of course. But do you think that
That was
crisis?
very generous of you, Dave.
Thank you. I try to be diplomatic where I can.
Yeah, that was good.
Do you think that those crises, which may have always been present, in the decades past, have been exacerbated by the financial pressures that we're being that now? I just feel like, and it really is just my own perspective on things, that the cost of things have far outpaced our ability to match it with revenue generation. The expectations for public service delivery have been magnitudes more costly than what they might have been in decades past. And I just, it was a comment I
I
made in
think
a previous episode that
I
we
heard it.
writing checks? Are we having to cash checks now that our predecessors have written, not through any fault or direct, malevolence on their own, but just the way
Sure.
things have shaken out because everything's so damn expensive?
As one of your predecessors, I would say, no, that's just a perception. That's not the reality.
Yeah, you would
I
say
think
that.
It's
Yeah.
not all your
look,
fault. Is that what you're
It's not
saying,
all your
Jeffrey?
fault.
it's not
Yeah,
all
there's
my
a bit of a
generation.
bias with that answer.
But I will tell you, no, I really don't think that has changed, and I don't think that has ever changed. Municipal resources have always been very difficult to come by. People have always struggled in their own personal family budgets. They don't like paying taxes. We don't like asking them to pay taxes. It's a very difficult thing, and it's been that way for generations.
So
I don't think any of that has changed. I can go back and I could tell you specific stories. I don't want to bore you all with all of my stories, but I could tell you stories from 20 years ago, 30 years ago of in the moment crises, which would sound extremely familiar today. Just a very quick one.
Yeah.
I remember I had when I was working in Middletown Borough, we had a street where they had unfortunately planted the wrong species of tree and they
Oh,
turned out
no.
to be fruit bearing trees. So they would drop their fruit every year all over the street. We tried to clean it up. Street trees are a complicated thing in Pennsylvania. These were between
Yes.
the sidewalk and the curb, so they're street trees. So in the end, what we decided to do after a public meeting with every homeowner on the block was to cut down 15 healthy trees that
Oh,
were
no.
mature and replace them
That's
with brand
awful.
new, little teeny, brand new
Eh,
trees. Well, the people on the block were not shocked because they were part of the town hall meeting process, but the community lost their mind You're cutting
Yeah,
down
you've
trees.
ruined that street.
Ruined the
You've ruined the
I
downtown. It used to be so beautiful.
Yes, it wasn't downtown, but it was still, you ruined the look of that street. Well, of course, there was a reason and there was a plan and there was public outreach, but this was in the era before social media, so there was no wide um, net of communication. That was a crisis that had to be dealt with. That was not, that's a lesson I learned about communicating or how people react to something as simple as cutting down trees. That can be extremely emotional for people. Cutting down trees, certain people take that very personally. You have to be
Yeah.
smart about cutting down trees. I learned that. I learned that through a bad experience. So, I mean, that was a real crisis. That could happen in your community tomorrow.
What about when
We won't be cutting any trees down in my community tomorrow.
It
So we're
could.
gonna be okay.
Well, it was a
just get that
reason.
out there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe the borough of Bellefonte. Yeah.
You
No,
never know.
no, we love our trees. What
Cut
about
the tree.
when, so we have these crises that I think we can kind of stratify in different layers of government, right? We have federal crises, we have global crises, we have state, local crises. I think that one of the things I've seen in recent years, and just in the last 5 to 10 years, has been this gravitation of local agencies to try to tackle or at least be a part of those global crises. And for us, my opinion is that, I mean, while it's a laudable goal, and I think everybody needs to do their part to address some of those crises, like climate change is a good example. I think a lot of our communities have taken local interest in how we can help have a more sustainable
We have a
climate.
sustainability action plan. Yep.
Right, right, for sure. And that's, like I said, a laudable goal, but it is another tax on finite resources. Now, I don't mean a literal tax, but I mean that we have to dedicate staff to that. We have to dedicate bandwidth to that. How do you kind of navigate some of those new attempts to kind of branch into those larger issues?
I've always tried to separate. You're right. There's the mitigation of the impact
Right.
of federal and state issues on our local communities, which we always will have to deal with. Whatever they do rolls downhill and we have to deal with it. I
Right.
remember Eden recently talking about the whole history of MS4 regulations and how it started on the federal level and then went to the state level and then went to the local level. And now we have all these municipalities in Pennsylvania which have to build things and do things to deal with stormwater management because it started as a federal issue. Mitigation of the issue that came down from up above is going to be happening forever. What I've been blessed not to have to deal with, which some of our peers have had to deal with, is when a local municipality, a township board, or a city council or a borough council has decided to take a position on a political issue, a
Yeah.
federal issue. It
Right.
happens all the time now. That is
Right.
not something I recall from the past. And I think that's because of the fact that now information is right in our face. And so we sit at home and we watch either CNN or we watch CNN on our phone or however we consume news or Fox News or MSNBC or whatever it's called. I'm
Anything,
not
yeah.
endorsing or any particular source of information. On the other hand, it does make you want to feel like you want to act. And I think one of the things is the leaders in our community, of whatever political party they are, decide that they want to take action. I know, for example, that last night in the city of Harrisburg, where I am an advisor, at the city council meeting, there was a very significant debate about ICE coming into the community and doing enforcement of immigration rules in the streets of the city. That is a very divisive and very difficult issue. And as a
Yeah. That's
municipal manager,
challenging.
it's extremely hard for me to know even where, it's one thing to say, how should the police department react to it? Okay, that's more like a mitigation thing where,
Right.
okay, the police department has to react somehow. But how should the rest of the municipal organization react? I'm not sure we are equipped as municipalities to deal with those large federal and international issues, which come down the pike to us and do create local crises. It's a very new and difficult thing. But if that's what our elected officials, if that's what your township board or your borough council wants to deal with, then I think we as staff need to be responsive and say, okay, if you want to take this issue up, if you want to have a position or you want to take an action, I'm going to give you the best information that I can gather and what are realistic things that you can either do or say to try to weigh into this issue. because our job, I think, and I think the two of you would agree with this, is to be responsive to the needs of our elected officials. And if that's what they want, if they want to start passing resolutions about political issues on the state or federal level, then I think we're going to have to respond as good staff and try to give them choices that they can do. But that is relatively new. I don't recall that from the 1980s and the 1970s, municipalities were regularly weighing into those kind of issues.
So let me ask you guys this question. Who defines if something is a crisis in your community? Is it your board? Is it you? Is it your staff? Is it the community member? Who gets to say this issue is a crisis and we are going to address it in the short term, with urgency?
Everybody, I
Yeah,
think
everybody.
everybody.
Everybody, really?
It's gotta be,
Everybody.
well, it's a consensus thing. I mean, I have had citizens come to the podium at a public meeting and declare something a crisis and seen the reaction of the audience and the council and staff go, "Mm, and maybe not really." So, I mean, I think that sometimes it's, you need to have the consensus of the community in response, and that's how a crisis something becomes a crisis.
Well,
I've
here's the
also
problem, right? If everything is a crisis, nothing is.
Yeah.
Right? If we treat every issue like it's a crisis, like it's the crisis of the day. If we come in the morning, you look at your email, you look at your phone, your text messages, you meet with your staff, and all of a sudden it's like, yep, this is the issue of the day. Social media says it is. The board agrees. We're dealing with it. Then you're never going to have sort of like the methodical march towards making long-term progress on those policy priorities of the governing body and enhancing your operations. If you're sort of just zigzagging and bouncing from crisis to crisis to
putting out
crisis. So
fires.
that's sort of my question. Right,
But
putting out fires. Right.
here's the lesson from firefighting, right? Because you have to have both fire suppression and fire prevention, and
That's right.
you're not doing a good job if you're just focusing on one or the other. And
That's right.
so it's the same rule in what we do, which is that we do need to have fire suppression where we can put out fires or at least control the event so that they're manageable and that they're dealt with in an orderly manner and safely and efficiently. On the other hand, we have to have prevention, which means that we have to do the things in our community to try to address the global issues that our elected officials and our citizens care about before there are crises.
I think
Go
it's
ahead.
important too that we recognize that we can only control what's within our ability to control. And I mean, that may sound like a very self evident answer, but when we react in a very kind of emotional or dramatic way to a crisis that faces us, then that has reverberations throughout our staff and throughout our communities. So, it's kind of incumbent on us to develop that poker face. We can't be too swayed by the temperature in the room, and we can't overreact, because once that temperature gets turned up, that just, and it's obvious that you're responding to that, I think that has this echo effect, and everybody operates in that same level of crisis mode. That leads to attrition, that leads to infighting. It leads to all the negative organizational consequences that we try every day to avoid. So, I mean, for us, what's within our ability to regulate is how we respond.
Dave, how do you go about regulating that?
I mean, I think it's just a matter of stepping back in the moment and evaluating, whether it is a true crisis. Number one, because as we said, a couple of times this episode, there are real true crises, or what, whether it's something that just needs to be handled through the natural course of things, and then also giving that message clearly to your staff. I've told department heads many times, look, nobody's breathing down my neck about this, and I'm not going to breathe down yours. Put it in the in the docket, or put it in the pipeline, and address it when you can, and I'll handle the blowback if there is any. I mean, we also have a responsibility as being the chief administrators to be a little bit of a shock absorber and buffer our leadership team where we can from the kind of visceral reactions of the different stakeholders involved. So, as I said once before, it's more art than science, but being socially aware and it present in the moment is a good way to kind of balance your reactions to some of those more community driven crises or manufactured kinds of crises.
Jeffrey, is there a generational difference here that we're missing?
No, that's what was my whole point, and I understand why without perspective it might appear that way, but no, I don't think there is. I think this is the regular course of business. Other than the social media thing, this is the regular course of business, and this is the way municipal government has always been. And it has always been an intense series of challenges both regular, systematic, and routine ones, but also ones that come out of nowhere. And I do think you have to be prepared for that. You have to be prepared both in terms of a plan and a protocol and staffing and a procedure on how to deal with things so that you don't there's no place for panic. Just like there is in addressing any crisis, you can't panic. You have to be um, you have to be calm, you have to execute your plan, you have to know how to address the public and the elected officials. You need to be able to communicate. There will be a new crisis every day, and you can't let it overwhelm you. You can't let it take away from your strategic planning or your long-term goals in your municipality. But you do need to be able to have a municipality that is nimble enough that it can address these things, these fires, so that they put them out in a safe and efficient way as they arise. And I think where we see communities struggle is when they're not prepared, they are understaffed, or do not have core competencies to address the challenges. And then it's hair on fire and they don't know what's going on and they panic, or the elected officials panic. And this is, I think, why you need to have competent staff who have been through the trenches, have fought the wars, who know how to put out fires. You don't panic under pressure, even when people are screaming and yelling or something appears on social media. It happens, and you just have to deal with it in a systematic and calm way to address whatever arises. But I don't think it's new, other than the social media.
So I think the lack of newness is really interesting. So we know that we have grad students, undergrad students, young professionals who are listening to this podcast. Some are in the field or trying to break into the field or considering the field. So I guess the question is, what level of advice would we give to them? And I would tell them that you can do it, right? You can survive. It is sort of a lifestyle. We've sort of talked in previous episodes of this podcast about how, being a municipal manager shouldn't be your entire personality, but it does sort of become part of who you are and how you approach this work and the style that you bring to it. But you can survive that sort of pressure environment. Many of us have, many of us do. And according to Jeffrey, right, giving us a different perspective than just the one of the generation on the rise perspective, it sounds like this has been a sort of a long-term thing in the field. And I guess we would all agree that it's not going away. This isn't going anywhere. And I think to that perspective, one of the things that I don't want to speak for you guys, but I certainly believe local government plays a role in the lives of those who live, work, and play in our communities, right? Local government does serve a function.
The most significant role
Definitely.
at any level of government
I agree.
is
I
local
agree.
government.
The rubber
Which
hitting
is
the
why
road.
our phones ring, the emails ring, why our social media pages are active with people's participation. And Jeffrey, to a point you made earlier, even if it's not necessarily our issue, right? Even if it's not necessarily this layer of government dealing with it, they still come to us. They want us to have an opinion. They want us to influence it. They want us to sort of solve their problem. And they're putting pressure on the local government. And I think with that comes a lot of responsibility. I think that burden is heavy. And as leaders in our organization, we sort of have to carry that. And I think that brings sort of an internal pressure, which I want to talk about as well, right? We spent a lot of time talking about external pressure, pressure from our teams, pressure from our communities, from our boards. What about the pressure you place on yourselves, right? I know for myself, I feel a lot of responsibility for the roles that we have, for the success of my community, for addressing issues here, for advocating for and enabling the teams that we serve and have the privilege to serve with. That is a lot of pressure. I think we're used to it. We live and breathe this all of the time, so it's a part of our daily lives. But that's a responsibility that I'm aware of, and the pressure with that is intense. It doesn't go anywhere.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
agree completely. I think that is something that is common among managers. I think we do internalize it. We do live and breathe it, and we become part of our communities. I think that that's something that those of us who have switched communities, and all three of us have done that over the course of our
Yes.
careers. It's amazing how we stop being involved in the day to day of our last community and
Yeah, that is
really
weird, isn't it?
and then we
Yeah.
just totally obsess about our new community as
Yeah.
if that was natural. I don't think it's natural. I just think it's part of what we do as municipal managers. We absorb everything. Who are the key stakeholders? What are the interest groups? What are the issues that are currently at play? What are the historic perspectives? And we do that like that's the thing people do when they move to a new town, which they don't, by the way, just in case you don't realize that. That makes us unusual. Most people don't even know which municipality they live in because they
That's
live
right.
that's their life. They don't need to. But we are obsessed with our communities because it's our profession. It's not just our home. It's our profession. And when we move to a new community, we become, in a healthy way, obsessed with the goings on in our new community, because our role is to address their needs. And how could you know their needs if you're not familiar with their challenges? So I think that that is part of being a manager. You're right. Young people entering the profession should be prepared to become obsessed with everything in their community, give it their all. But that's the good and the bad. That's the crises and the celebration as well. I mean, I'm sure you guys have gone to community celebrations and felt such pride that you work for a town that has, love and friendship and neighborliness, and it makes you feel
Absolutely.
great. It's a wonderful feeling. Just like the crisis can be difficult, the celebration can be wonderful. So that's part of being a municipal manager.
Yeah, it is an interesting point that you bring up because at least the one common denominator that I've experienced across all the communities that I've been a part of and subsequently left has been that you kind of have this lightness of being after you're gone that almost hits as you're walking out the door. And I think for me anyway, that's when I realized how much pressure I'd been under. I love it and I relished it. And at the time, like when I was in it, it was something that gave me a tremendous amount of fulfillment and energy that I probably wouldn't have in any other profession. But when it's over, and sometimes it's abrupt. I mean, some of us lose our jobs in circumstances that are beyond our control.
Yeah, it's so awkward because
You
like there's no grieving process for you. You just walk out of town hall one day and you're not coming back.
And it's like, I don't it's kind of like what people that have near death experiences describe it as. It's like, oh my
They
God,
keep
just
going.
yeah.
The old town keeps going with or without you forever.
Yeah, they don't really
It's
need you, but
forever.
you're like, "What? You don't need me anymore?" Like, it's so weird. Yeah.
I tell this great story. When I switched from Middletown Borough to Chambersburg Borough, I had 2 weeks in between the two jobs. And I took the kids to Disney, which, is actually very common because, when are you going to take your kids to Disney? So you take them in between
In
jobs.
between
So it's
jobs.
actually a tradition amongst managers. We went to Florida to go to
That's
take
pretty
the
funny.
kids
I
to
haven't done
Disney.
that. Dave, have you done that?
No, but I will, I'm
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you
Now that
go.
I know
What
it's a
else are you going to
Yeah,
tradition.
now
do?
that you know it's a tradition, you have to do it. Yeah,
Tradition.
it'd be wrong not to.
This is crazy. I didn't bring a cell phone at all.
That's
What?
crazy.
I know. I went away for 10 days
Mm.
without a cell phone
I will
because
say, between my last role and this one, I had some time off. Dave, what do we call it? Free agency, right?
Free agency, that's
Yeah,
right.
free agency. And I rented a house down in Cape May, New Jersey. It was very nice. And I turned my phone off for the week. I watched baseball. I turned the TV on to watch baseball, but
I just
Yeah.
turned off.
Yeah.
I had 10 days between jobs. I was not the manager of either community. It
right.
was the only time that that's ever happened in my life. I didn't need a cell phone. It was a
That's
very
nice.
weird feeling,
That is
but
weird.
I will always remember it as the pause. I think, Dave, to your point, I think that's part of the grieving process because even though it was my choice to switch communities, you still have to sort of put your last community in a box and put a bow on it and put it on
Right.
the shelf and move on to your new community. And part of the way I dealt with that was to sort of unplug for a short period of time and reset everything and then dive back into the new community with all the gusto that I had in the previous community.
Right.
Yeah, there is a downside to that too. I mean, I know it's a more depressive way to look at it, but for me anyway, that lightness of being is quickly replaced by this feeling of, not being a part of something bigger than yourself anymore. And there's value in managing in crisis that we need to acknowledge because we are a part of the solution. And there's a
Sure.
lot of fulfillment that comes of that. And when that ends, especially if it ends abruptly and for reasons and circumstances beyond your control, it's a hard realization to wake up one morning and you look at your calendar and it's empty. And what do you got
Yeah.
to do? Well, maybe I got to run a couple of errands, but I am no longer part of something bigger, and it's hard to deal with.
I
If
will
it
tell you,
ever
a tea
happens,
time is a good way to fill up some space on the
if it ever
calendar. And
happens
you
again,
just
just you have to have a little bit of self-confidence. I will find the place, I will find the role, I will
yeah.
find the journey. You have to have that is true. It's like the actor, in the Broadway play closes, what do they do the next day? It's the same thing. But
Mhm.
I think you need to have a little self-confidence that it will work itself out and you should enjoy it. Enjoy the break. In this business that we're three of us
It
are
almost
in,
never comes.
you almost never have a break. You
Right.
cannot turn off or disconnect
We
sufficiently
work all the
compared to
time,
other
even when you're
people.
not
So,
working. Yep.
enjoy the ability to disconnect, even if it's only a short period of time. That's
That's a
my
great So I think the hot take from this episode is the pressure has been a part of this industry forever, or at least as long as Jeffrey can remember, which is longer than Dave and I combined.
Just forever.
And it's probably only getting more intense, and it's not going anywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's not going anywhere. Okay.
Be healthy, guys. Be healthy for yourselves and your family because it is overwhelming and it can consume you. And one of the things I will always tell a young manager is find ways to be healthy in your life so that it doesn't consume you and lead to unhealthy behaviors because it is a lot. The crisis becomes, and that would be true, Eden, as a volunteer firefighter. You know this.
Yep.
That's true in emergency services.
Mhm.
It can overwhelm you and it can
Can.
lead to bad behavior. So you need to take care of yourself and your family and have that healthiness in your life so that you can deal with the pressure of the never ending crisis.
Yes. Agreed.
Yeah, agreed. And I think the takeaway for the generation on the rise is that despite all the, kind of doom and gloom scenarios that we've been talking about over the last hour, I don't think any one of us, and Brandon I would throw in this ilk too, would trade it for anything. I mean,
Agreed. Love this
it's
profession, care
Love it.
deeply about what we do.
for sure. Yeah, great people you get
Absolutely
to
agree.
work with, great experiences you get to have, great opportunities, growth in your community. You're always moving the ball forward, and at the end of the day, it's probably the best decision I ever made was throwing my hat in the ring for an assistant manager position in 2012.
Yep.
Love it.
A now retired township manager here in Pennsylvania, he said to me, a number of years ago, he said, Eden, the thing about municipal management, he was like, it's a feast and a famine. When it's a feast, the feast is really good. He's like, but you have to enjoy it because it needs to get you through the famine. The famines are really hard. Sometimes they're really long. And you just have to remember how good that feast was and work to get back there because it will come. And I think that's true. At least it's been true for me so far. Thank you so much for joining us. That's a wrap for Generation on the Rise. Jeffrey Stonehill, Borough Manager of Chambersburg, thank you so much for joining us as our first ever guest here on Generation on the Rise. We appreciate it. Talking about sort of crisis as the new normal and, pressure and the pressure cooked environment that is municipal management. Be sure to tune in next week. Here's the teaser. We're going to have Brad Gottschall, the now former county manager of Warren County, Virginia. Brad is a former Pennsylvania manager as well. If you look up him and his municipality, you'll find that he was terminated 4 months on the job. He took his severance and he's now back into free agency. He's going to come onto this podcast and we're going to talk about how these things work. What happens when, you're there for 4 months and all of a sudden you're out? Right? You walk out of the county building and that's sort of the end. You find yourself in free agency. What protections do you need to put into your employment agreements? How do you sort of navigate those water? How do these things play out? What's he going to do next? And what are the lessons learned that we can apply? That's the real side and sometimes the dark side of this profession, of this career. It is challenging. And we're going to be learning from Brad on that process and look forward to having him
Oh yeah.
on Generation on the Rise.
Right.
Guys, any final thoughts?
Great to
Thanks
see
a
you.
lot, guys.
Okay.
You set the bar high, Jeffrey.
Love being here, even though I'm not really on the rise anymore. But I do.
That's right.
It's really been wonderful, and I think the podcast is great, and I'll be a big fan for a long time to come.
Very good.
All
Thank you
right,
so much.
appreciate that.
Until next week, take care.
Have a good week.